So, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Speak the Truth. My name is Gary Johnson. I'll serve as your facilitator today. I'm with blackmeninamerica.com, online magazine. I'd like to introduce your host for Speak the Truth. He is the 2020 NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists Pioneer Award winner. He is a DC radio talk show sports legend, civil rights activist, the one and only Mr. Harold Bell. Over to you, Mr. Bell.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary. It must be Sunday, and this must be Speak the Truth. I'm Harold Bell, and today I'm looking forward to having a very exciting show, a really very enlightening show. We will be dealing with a lot of history. I got two fantastic ladies on with me today, and let me introduce my first guest. My first guest is the CEO and owner of Finding Things for You, LCCU. She retired from the federal government as a senior policy writer and researcher. She has undergrad degrees in urban studies and African American studies from the University of the District of Columbia. She holds professional certificates in genealogy, publishing, investigation, research, and paralegal. She has been a genealogist since 1981, appearing in numerous television interviews and documentaries. She is a 2020 Virginia Humanitarian Scholar. She has received numerous awards. In 2019, she was nominated for Who's Who in America. In 2014, she became Alexandria, Virginia's Living Legend. She is the author of 2 books and a short story in anthology. Her most recent book was published in 2019, Alexander Freeman Cemetery, A Legacy of Freedom. Her second book, published in 2013, African Americans of Alexandria, Virginia, Beacons of Light in the 20th Century. Her short story was published in 2006, an anthology book, Everyday Grace, Everyday Miracle, Living the Life You Were Born to Live, Angels in a Time of Need. She is a freelance writer on local history for her column, The Other Alexandria, in the Alexandria Times newspaper. She maintains 2 blogs. She's a member of a dozen geology societies, numerous historical writing societies and organizations. I would like to introduce my dear friend and my goddaughter, Char. How you doing, Char?
I'm fine, HB. I'm doing fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. Let me introduce our second guest. Our next guest says her passion is sharing history. She says, I love telling the difficult stories. I enjoy helping people connect with their heritage, their culture, and the history of the places we live. Everyone has a story, and every place has a story. It's when those stories come together, that is when we give a voice to the people and the times and the places that they live. Whether it's found in a cemetery, a courthouse, or a cabin, in the woods, there's a story of people that were there. In order to preserve these stories, we must share them. They will not be forgotten, whether the story is a German immigrant who becomes an abolitionist or a slave who is an American hero. These are the stories that bring meaning to the communities we live in and help us understand our past, helping our young people to know their ancestors and the stories of their lives creates a better tomorrow for everyone. I would like to welcome from St. Louis, born and raised in St. Louis, Dorris Keeven-Franke. How you doing, Dorris?
I'm doing fine, Harold. Thank you for inviting me today.
Oh yeah, thank you for taking time out to be with us. Gary, can we show that video in Lincoln Park in 2020? I think everyone needs to see this video.
Homeowners, this incredible tip is just for you. If you owe less than $331,000,
has its sights set on the Emancipation Memorial that's sitting in front, in the middle of Lincoln Park. They say the statue makes the black slave look subservient to Abraham Lincoln. But National Park Service is ready for it. They put up a barrier around the monument yesterday. Our Tom Dempsey, he's there live. Tom, you've been out there for quite some time. Care to predict if that statue is going to be standing, say, for the next 24 hours?
Yeah, well, Bruce, you can see the people behind me right now. This event all began sort of orderly. You know, we heard protesters talking about the need to take this statue down. Again, it dates back to 1876, and some of these protesters are saying it speaks to racial undertones of black people being inferior to white people. Those are the words of these protesters. We saw speeches out here in front of this big crowd here at Lincoln Park. Some of the people saying that the statue should be removed and put into a museum. Others saying that this sort of issue and debate could also be applied to address issues like racism in D.C. But just about maybe 20 minutes ago, a pretty heated argument broke out between some of the older supporters of the statue saying it should stay and the younger protesters. The younger protesters saying that, you know, the older generation had their time to address this, and now it's up to the younger generation to try and get this statue removed. You know, as I was just saying, the younger protesters saying they want to see this torn down, with it being what they call a symbol of racism. But this older generation that we've spoken to, speaking of the historical significance of this statue, one of the men we spoke to, Keith Winstead, he's not from around here, but he is the cousin of boxing legend Muhammad Ali. Why are we talking about them? Because the two of them did a DNA test a few years ago, and it turns out Winstead and Ali are actually descendants of Archer Alexander, who is the man depicted on the statue with Abraham Lincoln. In an interview with us, with WUSA, Winstead was talking about the stories of Alexander and how he saved Union troops during the Civil War. And he says this statue has great historical.
Understand you couldn't hear that.
Yeah, I couldn't hear it too well.
All right, hang on. This is important. Let me get back 1 second. Let's try this. This is important.
We're going to be should be seeing Keith Winstead in this. Keith Winstead is also a good dear friend from Louisville, Kentucky. He is actually the Muhammad Ali family historian. Keith was here in Washington with us a couple of years ago at the Miracle Theater to celebrate my debut of the Muhammad Ali interview in 1974. So Keith has been a dear friend. In fact, Keith introduced me to Dorris. So let's hope that we can get this.
Were you able to hear that second version?
No, we didn't hear the second version of Keith.
Neither. Whoa.
No.
Okay. Because they do mention Keith.
They didn't mention him, but he does the interview. We didn't get the second part.
Okay. Let's see here. Maybe 3 times the charm. Let's see here. Let's try one more and see here. One more go. Let's optimize. Let's see here. Let's go.
Black people being inferior to white people. Those are the words of these protesters. We saw speeches out here in front of this big crowd here at Lincoln Park. Some of the people saying that the statue should be removed and put into a museum. Others saying that this sort of issue and debate could also be applied to address issues like racism in D.C. But just about maybe 20 minutes ago, a pretty heated argument broke out between some of the older supporters of the statue saying it should stay and the younger protesters.
Yeah, we still having the problem.
Still having problems? Yeah.
Let's move on. Maybe we can bring it up after the show much later. I wanna go. Let's go to Dorris first, and I'll come back to Char. Dorris, you are writing a book, and I understand this will be about 300 pages on on the real story and the real truth behind Abraham Lincoln and Archer Alexander. Tell us about that, because I remember when they were trying to destroy, knock down that monument down in Lincoln Park, which I really never knew was there. And I used to drive by Lincoln Park 2 or 3 times a month. And I grew up in that area. And then I found out that this monument with Archer Alexander and Abraham Lincoln was there in the center of the park. Give us a little background on that, Doris, will you?
Well, the reason for that is, even on the monument, and as people talk about the monument, Archer's role is usually just the unidentified slave. Nobody really seems to identify him at all. Many of us do know, and for those that know who he is, even then barely would know why he's there or who he is. And part of the problem has been, as I say, it's hard to share the difficult stories. And it was even harder back in Archer Alexander's time, which his family, by the way, called him Archie. And the reason for that is because he is just what he is portraying there. But he really was more of a hero than a lot of people realized. And when I started researching this story with Keith, at that point, all we had to rely upon was a book that was written by a very esteemed individual named William Greenleaf Eliot, who founded Washington University here in St. Louis. He's a minister, and he had published a book about Archer. Well, folks, don't believe everything you read or everything you hear. And if you're a genealogist, you really start digging, and excuse the expression. And Keith had asked if I knew where Archer Alexander was buried. When I began examining Eliot's book, the first thing I thought was, this is very confusing and the narrative doesn't quite work and things just don't jive up, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And I started looking for exactly where he was buried. Long story short, what we discovered was where Eliot says in his book that he's buried, he's not. Well, once we uncovered that and Keith and I started going further, we discovered that there were a lot of discrepancies in the book. And in those discrepancies, they cover everything from not only where he's buried, but the name of his parents, the dates that he's born, a lot of his personal history. And I just feel if you're going to tell the story of this hero today, and you're going to explain who this man is, I want it to be for who he really was. So my book uses all original documents, everything from tax lists to probates, some of the favorite things that as genealogists love, because it's all original documents. Now, the other problem is Archer Alexander is born in 1806 in Virginia. Now, in 1806 in Virginia, there are no people other than the white people that are listed on censuses and so many different records that we all just, a lot of us genealogists would just take for granted. Well, researching Archer's family has had to take its research in a whole different direction. So there is a better explanation of what I'm doing. Now, I will tell you that William Greenleaf's book, while it was published in 1885, about 5 years after Archer died, is today what we would call historical fiction. But it wasn't Eliot that changed it. Eliot had turned to a close friend, and when he couldn't get the book to be published, and that close friend would do what we would call tweak it and make a lot of changes to make it more suitable for what the publishers would publish. In fact, that friend actually even gave the title Archer Alexander, From Slavery to Freedom. So this is really a project about getting back to the truth, the original narrative and knowing exactly who Archer Alexander was. And he was someone who worked very hard and emancipated himself, and is considered by many people to be quite a hero in himself.
Right. In fact, I want to bring Char in there because we're talking about Archie Alexander being born in Virginia. And of course, we got another genealogist here with us, and Char. Tell us about the other Alexandria when it was Washington, D.C. A lot of people don't realize that Alexandria was once a part of Washington, D.C. Tell us about that, Char. Take yourself off mute. I think you're still on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Let me hear you now.
Okay. When they were forming Washington, D.C. in around 1796, they took land from Maryland and took land from Virginia to make up Washington, D.C. Alexandria, Virginia, and Arlington County, Virginia were part of that part that came D.C. And so anybody who was born in that particular area, they called it Alexandria, D.C. So when Alexandria came back to Virginia in 1846, 1847, as a genealogist, as you know, Doris, when you started researching people and you started seeing, oh, this person was born in Washington, D.C., or you started getting confused. And then you want to look for where the records are, actually where the records are. And the records for that period of time is going to be in D.C. And then once they retreated back to Virginia, they started recording things in D.C. So it's interesting about Archie because Archie, at least D.C. and Virginia, had something in common. They recorded Blacks. So freed Black people, even if he was free before he left, he had to register as a freed person. And that way, one of the ways of trying to uncover a little bit more about him.
Mm-hmm. Doris, I want to say this. How did this history get all twisted up? We had, I remember Eleanor Holmes Norton was leading the charge. She's supposed to be a historian and a civil rights leader. And she didn't even know the story of Abraham Lincoln and Archer. She was leading the charge to have the statue taken and put somewhere else, But after you guys and Keith came to the forefront and said, hold it, no, this is wrong. Something is wrong. You all have not done your homework. The media has not gotten the real story out. So take it from there, Doris.
Well, I think that the kind of things happen because, as Char is saying, we don't always look at the original source and the right source, and we get things confused. We don't really dig much anymore. If we don't get the story in like 6 seconds via Google, then we go on, and we just take for granted that people are telling us the right thing. And I think part of the problem too is we tend to apply modern day methodology to the events in 1876 when this monument was erected. Now, this monument was put up was first planned in 1865 when Charlotte Scott, a former slave, got the idea from her own feelings, and she had good reason to have the feelings about this monument and about Lincoln. And she proposed a monument, and her former master gave it to someone else. Long story, it ended up in the hands of a group of people that was called the Western Sanitary Commission. Now, there are 2 different sanitary commissions operating. One would not have been near as good for this story as the one that it really was, but not that many people knew about the Western Sanitary Commission. The Western Sanitary Commission helped to create the Freedmen's Bureau. They worked with contraband camps. These were people and troops that they were already familiar with, and that's why it ended up in their hands. Now, there was a troop of U.S. colored troops that in Mississippi, when they first even heard about this monument, they thought it was such a grand idea. Their leaders had to tell them, slow down, let other people give money. They raised $12,000 in just a few months. But things changed. And, you know, the other people that got into power and that were changing the narrative and changing the story. And things sort of got dropped, you know, the big anticipation of this monument. If it hadn't been for the same man that if he hadn't written the book, we wouldn't even know any of the story, William Greenleaf Eliot, going to the sculptor and taking him Archer Alexander's picture, Archer wouldn't be the person perhaps on that monument. But the real thing that Eleanor Norton Holmes really, messed things up was when she actually stated, did the people themselves that gave this money approve this? Well, these were people that had just no time before, days before, sometimes if you were talking about Texas, not even knew that they were free people. These were people giving their money for a monument. They didn't have a mailing address, they didn't have Twitter feeds, and they did not have a Facebook poll to be asked if this was what they wanted. But the project proceeded and did happen. And the people with the Western Sanitary Commission were very much friends of these people and did the best they could. There were 2 other monuments proposed at that time. And believe me, they would have been far, far, far worse. They would have been down a long, long time ago. But to apply modern day methods and say, okay, did we take a poll? Did everybody, you know, register their name and address and have a bank account? No. I would never say that. And that's just the whole point. History, that monument reflects what they wanted and was paid for by all the former enslaved and free Blacks in America. It's totally funded by them. It was their money. And Western Sanitary Commission made sure that it happened. They funded the base and they talked the sculptor into doing it for the price that the former enslaved had actually raised.
All right. Char, tell us about, you being a native of Alexandria. When did Alexandria break away from Washington, D.C., or when did Washington, D.C. break away from Alexandria? How did that come about, Char?
Unmute.
You're on mute. Get off mute. Get off mute.
It was around 1846 when Alexandria and Arlington wanted to come back to Virginia. What happened is that Alexandria and Arlington had Southern views, and they didn't really like the way that DC was going. Also, they had representation and they could vote in Virginia, and they didn't have that in Washington, DC. And it was talks about that led up to the Civil War, but it was talks and rumblings going on, and many of the slave owners that were in Alexandria and Arlington was fearful that DC will emancipate the slaves. So they wanted to go back to Virginia, and that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. Let's bring in some our guests out there who might have questions for Dorris and for Char. Anybody want to take that out first? I know we got a lot of DC natives out there. How about it? Anybody? Come on. Well, let me.
Yeah, no, look like Brother Jacques is unmuting here.
Okay, Jacques.
Good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon to you, Harold. I do have a question. I'm one of the few people. I was born in Washington, D.C., native Washingtonian. Me and my first wife for 42 years. She's still my first wife. But on the real side, I don't know that I really agree with D.C. being statehood. I kind of think that we should have a federal property that don't have the influences of the other states, and if people feel that strongly about it, then I think that we should, if anything, recede either back to Maryland, preferably Maryland, since I do reside in Maryland. And so I'd like to know what the two distinguished genealogists think about that.
Okay. Char, go ahead.
Well, I personally think that I worked in DC for 41 years, and I think that all of the government type of buildings and government agencies should stay independent. But I think DC needs to have voting rights. I think that they need to have representation. So I look at it as a quasi, somewhere middle of the road. If they can make some of it more state, but keep all the federal part of it, as not a state.
Okay. Dorris, hey Dorris, let me ask you something. I noticed in July 4 that Frederick Douglass, who was the first Black U.S. Marshal in charge, he came down to Lincoln Park and made a big speech on that July 4. Tell us exactly what he said and where he was coming from, Dorris.
Where he was coming from was that as the founding fathers had started our country and said that all people were equal, what he saw of what the July 4th represented was the fact that that was a little hypocritical, as we all know. And that's what he was trying to say. But yet at the same time, we have to agree that while if the founding fathers had not fought to make us free from Great Britain, it wouldn't matter Black or white, we could all be bowing to the Queen. I think that's what he was trying to say in a way that we could all understand and look at. It's a difficult subject. I agree with Char that even though I'm not a Washington, D.C. native, I totally agree with the premise, as I learned in civics class and in our government class in grade school, that it should be independent of all influence and be something that is for all of us. And I think even in Douglas's speech, he's trying to say that there should be a commonality and something that is for all. And it's really important to keep those things in mind when we look at these stories, because things are not the same as they were in 1865 and 1876. But we all want them to go further and better. And I can understand, I totally agree that anybody that lives someplace should actually be represented, just like all the rest of the country. I agree with that. So however they can work that out, I think will be a good thing.
Keith Winstead, are you out there, Keith? Keith Winstead. Are you out?
Yeah, I'm here. How you, Harold?
All right. Keith is my dear friend, and he is the cousin of Muhammad Ali and Archer. Tell us about Keith. Where are we in our history? Are we finally getting the truth about the relationship between Abraham Lincoln and Alexander Archer? Archer Alexander.
Archer Alexander. Yeah, thanks to Dorris, because when I found that Archer was my third great grandfather, I didn't know anything else about him. And I just knew he grew up in St. Louis. So I contacted different genealogy society in St. Louis and left messages on the board and got in touch with Dorris. And Dorris already knew everything.
Wow.
And I went to a Black Historical Society, and in St. Louis, they didn't even know who Archer was.
Wow.
They do now.
They do now. But Dorris knew about Archer. She knew his slave owner, knew his wife, knew the slave owner who owned his wife, knew about his kids, found out where he was buried, found out, showed us, we had a family from Louisville go to St. Louis. She showed us the house that Archer built, was in charge of building. and the property that he lived on. And took us to a museum where I was able to hold Archer Alexander's watch that he owned. So, and my son was able to hold it. So that's like my son's fourth great grandfather, and you're able to hold a watch that he used to own. And then she's learning more, you know.
Well, as Char is saying, when you're doing your research and you're actually at the location where these people lived, it's far, far easier. Everything is not digitized and online and available like so many young people think they can just Google and find out. Sometimes it takes some of us who have lived somewhere and grown up, and I've been writing for 40 years, and that's why I knew local history and I knew who Archer Alexander was.
Charles, the other Alexandria, how long have you been writing for the Alexandria Times, and the type of people that you have been covering? One of my favorite people, and it's how I met you, who just passed, Mr. Henson, and this guy was a stone cold. You loved Alexandria, you loved the people, you loved the kids, and we did a lot of things together in Alexandria with Christmas toy parties, bringing Earl Lloyd back, things like that. Tell us a little about Mr. Henson, because I want to pay tribute to him. A lot of people are really not aware of who this great man was.
Yes, I really became close to Mr. Henson probably around 2007. I grew up and I was born in Alexandria, but my folks were from Halifax County, Virginia. And if you know about migration, what happens is that people tend to stay in their little groups when they go to a new place. And my parents, everybody they knew was from Halifax County, you know, and so I didn't get to know about Alexandria history until I became an adult. Mr. Henson was like a father, and like I say, I got many fathers out there. But Mr. Henson was like a father. He loved Alexandria. He loved history. He was a lawyer by trade, and he was in search of connecting Josiah Henson to Matthew Henson. Matthew Henson was his mother's uncle, and he was convinced that Josiah Henson was somewhat Matthew's uncle, or at least related to him. And he was in the process of discovering that, but unfortunately he got cancer and he died last December. Mr. Henson belonged to many of the Alexandria clubs. He belonged to the All Men's Club. They're women now, but it's called the Departmental Progressive Union Club, which started in the 1920s for African American men who actually got government jobs. So that's why they named it that. Mr. Henson was on several commissions for the mayor, the former mayor, Ewell, and we met because he was working. I mean, well, he convinced me to join the group, and they were commissioned to identify prominent African Americans that made a difference in Alexandria. When I joined them, they had been together for 3 years, and so from that group, we decided to do a book. And so, and that's the first book, The Beacons of Light. And Mr. Henson named it, matter of fact, and was chairperson on that group. Then the other thing about Mr. Henson is that he had about 6 or 7 children, and he played a very strong role in his grandchildren's life. But he loved Alexandria. He loved just everybody. If you walk the street with him, he got to stop and talk to everybody and find out how they're doing, because you'll never make it to your destination. So, but he was just a very warm person, and he loved people.
I agree.
Harold, let me ask you a question.
Go ahead, Sydney.
They have a genealogy society or a genealogy institution that's based where?
Oh, they got many. So for me, I'm on the East Coast, and in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. You have a national African American genealogical society called Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. Their main address is in DC, and they have many chapters throughout the US. They might have one in St. Louis, if I'm correct.
So
So they have in North Carolina, Maryland, Virginia, New York, New Jersey. So they have many chapters, more than a couple dozen chapters.
can you get that information to Harold so he can send it to me?
Yes, I can do that.
I appreciate it. On the
Okay.
second question is that, and I'm looking at the prison industrial complex as it relates to the subject matter of genealogy and individuals who are in prison having the subject of their genealogy being traced, so that it brings about a mindset that people would be concerned about their genealogy. So now in prison, that is not a subject matter. And I think it has to do with reentry. When they come back into the community, if they have base knowledge from which they come, I think it begins to look at public safety in a different light with a genealogical history from which you come. At least it would be a conversation. So I'm interested in having the 2.4 million people that are incarcerated having a base or a reference or in touch with their genealogy as it relates to criminal justice.
That's interesting. A segment of my family that I researched from the present to back to 1800, and from the time I located a slave owner, and every part of their history, they fought like I don't know what. They were all they had a couple of runaways. They were they bucked the system every way they could up until today. And some would say it's in the genes. And when people started seeing it on paper, and when I explained to them and showed them documentation, slave owner giving them 30 lashes, recorded. When they became sharecroppers after the Civil War, my great grandfather would get mad and walk off the plantation, leave the crop there, and then they will almost starve in the wintertime because there was no money there because he didn't stay long enough. So it does come out in the research. One research further back, genealogy is no longer a reasonable hobby. It is expensive. And because it requires travel, if you're not in the local area, getting documents that used to be free cost now. In New York, I think a birth certificate costs over a death certificate costs over $30. You have some things online, but not everything is online. So it's not cheap like it used to be. And though things are online, when you're talking about actually doing the deep research and connecting people further back, it's costly. And genealogists are not cheap either. We can many of them are up to $100 an hour.
Well,
So
it's a core civil rights issue that must be addressed as we address family reunification, and it relates to families in communities being busted up. Just the whole disease of not knowing your genealogy.
Yeah, not knowing who you are.
So I'm believing that the federal government, since they were instrumentality in breaking it up and splitting it up, that they have to be the ones that facilitate bringing it back together. At least use the money that they have in these grants or institutions, that the genealogists work collectively to bring that back to the table for a thorough, forensic discussion about the need for it.
Okay. Doris, I want to ask you, I know you got a little more work to do on your book, but what does your book do out, Doris? The big book, 399 pages.
Boy, Harold, you have that thing growing every 5 minutes, don't you? Well, believe me, in a way, I have that exact same problem. And as Char would say, the thing about writing a book, just when you think you've got everything and you think you've got it all together and it invariably something else comes to light and you learn something more and it takes you down another rabbit hole and another story. And well, I've got to find this. As Keith would say, and totally agree, what we knew about this individual 3 years ago is a drop in the bucket compared to what we know today. So the story in the book, it takes a lot. Those words don't just jump on those pages in just the right order. It takes a lot of digging. And I'd love to see it done this fall, but it might be winter or spring. But I have been working with Virginia Humanities and doing an Virginia encyclopedia entry. And Keith doesn't even know this yet. And he's going to be upset when he hears all this and knows that he didn't know it. But what happened is, as I wrote the piece, and as Char would know, people start looking at it and editing and asking questions. And I mean, now they're down to, we have learned just by digging deeper, writing that article. And now they're down to, well, tell me the day that this happened. I've got it narrowed down to a 3-month window. And I'm talking about what exact night that Archer Alexander overheard the white men talking in the Naylor store, and he heard what was going on, and he took the brave act and he reported that to the Union. I mean, to be able to tell you what night somebody told somebody something that they shouldn't have even been doing, well, that's not easy.
Well, look, I want to say, you two ladies, this has been fantastic. I want to go around the room here and take a minute from everybody who wants to ask Char or Dorris a question before we let them go. Anybody?
I want to ask something. Hey, is Ancestry.com and companies like that, is that a good way to find out the history, or is that kind of bogus? Are they kind of bogus companies?
Well, Char, do you want me to go first?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, you go ahead first.
Okay, I do teach genealogy, and when I start my class sessions, and it's several weeks, the first thing I tell everybody is I ask, do you use this? And usually quite often people are trying to do this, have invested in it. It's not cheap. And I said, okay, well, for the next 4 weeks, don't touch it. And I'm going to teach you that how to be rational and think through all these hints that Ancestry will push at you. If you think that your ancestor is the only person ever lived by that name and that every hint they give you is exactly your ancestor, that's the biggest mistake that people use with sites like that. Now, if you take Ancestry and you build your research based on actual census records or actual records, marriage records or records, actual documents, and you base your research on that, that's going to be a lot better. But Ancestry loves to push 20 million hints at you. And the first thing that when my students come at me and go, I've hit a brick wall, I'm like, are you sure? The owner of Archie actually was the father, his name was Archibald Alexander. And he was there in Virginia way before Virginia was even before we were a country. But Archibald Alexander had come from Ireland. He had 15 children and 96 grandchildren.
Wow. He was busy.
Doris, what county? Do you know the county in Virginia?
He ended up in what is Rockbridge. He's outside of Lexington. And yes,
okay.
I want to talk to you more after this too.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I'd like to have to continue the conversation because we don't have enough time here to explore.
Now we'll come back. Char, you want to close out, Char? Go ahead,
Char. Well, I just want to say that as far as doing genealogy, I took 10 years out of my life just to take every course, every class, every workshop, everything I possibly could. My undergrad degree prepared me a lot for my research. So I had the research skill and analytical skills. It's important when you're doing genealogy because you can gather as much as you can, but if you can't analyze it and put it in perspective, then you know, it's not going to work for you. So in doing all of that and saying that one thing about having the genealogical skill and the academia skill, academia prepares you in what, you know, to go out there and research to see what books or whatever, but the genealogy skill puts you in touch with the primary source documents. And many professors I deal with, what happened, they don't know it's possible to get the primary source documents. And so what happened, it gives you a clear picture of this person that you're researching. And I find that came in handy when I'm researching for my books, because I can put that human touch to it. I can bring that individual more alive, and through my genealogical research background.
And I want to say this, thank you, Keith Winstead, for being a part of this show. And what Gary is going to do, he's going to put up Char and Dorris's websites where you can go and follow up from them at the end of the show. He'll have that up. Also, before you guys go, I want to take time out to say congratulations to our dear friend, Michael Jackson. Gary, will you run that piece on Michael for us where he was sworn in just recently?
Let's hope that this sound works.
Yeah.
I know we can get the video, but let's do this again and see what we can do with D.A. Jackson. So here we go. Let's see here. All right, let's go.
District Attorneys Association and his election.
We're gonna have sound problems.
No sound again?
Can't hear anything.
Jackson serves as the district attorney for the 4th Judicial Circuit, which consists of Bibb, Dallas, Hill, Perry, and Wilcox County.
Well, Michael, I just want to say congratulations. Michael was the first Black president of the District Attorney Association in Alabama. And Michael has been really a partner here on Speak the Truth. And congratulations, Michael, to both of you guys out there. Keep up the great things that you're doing. What we want to do, if everybody want to stay, we're gonna switch now to how crime has become a national wave around the country. Crime and violence has just gone up. Gary, could you run that first video and see if that can take?
I tell you, if none of these sound videos work, something's going on with the Zoom thing, but we'll see. Let's try it again. I got everything.
Gary, you might want to adjust the sound on the video and then share it.
All right, we'll try that.
Okay.
All right, so the sound is up on the video.
Okay.
And so we'll see if we can share. It's optimized for sharing. So here we go. Let's give it another shot.
Nearly 260 reportedly shot across the country, and almost 700 people were wounded in total. The epicenter of this out-of-control violence, Chicago. The Windy City saw its most violent weekend of the year. At least 100 people were shot, including children. 18 people were killed. Other crime, like in San Francisco, where a group of thieves, they looted a high-end department store, and no one even tried to stop them. The city being rocked by a shoplifting epidemic right now. All right, Greg, the only thing that's really going to stop the bleeding is you just have to.
Is that any better?
Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention because it affects each and every one of us who are participating in this Zoom show. The crime rate is going up around the country. The mayor in Chicago has called a state of emergency. When has Chicago not been in a state of emergency? That's what I want to know. People are dying all over the place. Had one of the worst weekends this past 4th of July weekend. It's the wild, wild west. And DC is no different. We're having murders that look like we're gonna go ahead of 2016 here in Washington, D.C. So I'm trying to figure out, what are these politicians doing that we're just letting people blood flow in the streets, man? So I just don't know. I just don't know what to say, man, because even when Miriam Bowser was warned not to hire that last police chief, which she did anyway, and crime went up every year. Now she brings in a police chief who's supposed to be a native Washingtonian, grew up in Langston Terrace, went to Spingarn High School like I did, been on the force for 31 years. And guess what? Nobody in the community knows him. How you gonna be on the police department for 31 years? And I've had police community relations forums all over the city, and he's never showed up for one. But now he's the chief, and you think that he's gonna solve the problem? Man, we got a big problem, man. The problem is leadership. Anybody want to take it from there? Well, talk about defunding the police. I don't want to defund the police. We need all the good cops that we can get and get rid of the bad cops. That's what we need to do.
I'd like to say something. I have a security system on my building in Ward 7, and my phone has been off the hook with crime, warnings, carjackings, shootings, stabbings. It's really scary. It's gotten close to Capitol Heights even. I know, there's some basic issues here. Racism is one, politics is another, but I think more than anything else, it's personal. Until we get back to acknowledging God and the parameters in which we are supposed to live, we can forget it. Any and everything is a go now. People just don't care about each other anymore. You can see that with vaccinations. You can talk, and I'm saying this personally. Kids think that, well, I just won't get it. You can't make them understand. It's not just about you, it's about the public as well. They don't care. So the selfishness, greed, anger, lawlessness, you name it, it's just coming to pass. And the only answer I know as a minister is Christ. That's the main one. And then under that, because the scripture talked about government, it talked about law, it talks about all of that. But we're not seeing one another as human beings. People just don't care. People who claim, I saw 3 pastors who were involved in the insurrection on TV. 3 pastors. If pastors don't have it together, my God, what's going to happen?
Well, Dr. Fisher, I'd like to say this, that when folk are going to these institutions of higher learning and they get their degrees, that doesn't necessarily connect them to the community where they have to do services for the people who live there. They're not in touch with them. They don't care about that. And we see that as it grows and expands all over the 69 square miles of Washington, D.C. So you got gentrification. You got too many dynamics that are at the center of the table and not a centralized focus on dealing with the humanity, whether it's injustice, whether it's human rights, whether it's continuation of poverty being spread throughout the climate of DC, throughout the nation itself. And the solution ultimately is that no one really is communicating about solutions. They're looking for that money, but they're not talking about real common solutions of touching the needs or the threads or the root of young people who are absent of any type and kind of knowledge that brings them to a reality to who they are. Now, these sisters talking about genealogy, and that's one of the core roots that's absent. You don't have no reference to nothing. You can't think nothing. You can't do nothing. You can't really have a conversation about doing any reality if your example does not allow them to be included. Everything is excluded from the mayor on down. It's not through the needle of politics that we're going to resolve this. It is through the community of people who live in those communities, who know those folk.
I think you just reiterated what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you remember when the Black church used to be the center of the community and people came together to discuss their problems and whatnot. We no longer have that now. Young people don't want to come to church. Old people don't want to come to church. Pastors are more about how many cars they can get, how big churches they can get, how many choir robes they can get. So that's the source. And we need to get back to the source of our problems. We can't just keep blaming everybody else. We do have to be responsible. When I hear these motorcycles going 100 miles an hour down Pennsylvania Avenue, I can't blame the government for that. The guys riding those bicycles, what happened to their parents? Were they ever taught about, acknowledging other people in the community? So we have a lot of responsibility on ourselves. But again, for me as a minister, the church is at the base of all of this, because church can address racism, church can address politics, church can address education. There should be no church in DC where have parents who cannot get their kids to school. If you're taking an offering, if 3 or 4 churches have to come together, put one kid through school, one person through law school, let's do it. That's gone. We're stagnant because the main institution that used to be for us and push people forward is no longer operating.
Dr. Fisher, can I add something to what you're saying?
Go ahead.
In my world of genealogy, I find that many people don't know who they are, and they have when they are able to find out who they are, it's a life-changing. Their way they think, the way they carry themselves. A legacy of slavery is a heavy load, and we never, as African Americans, we never been to a psychiatrist. Nobody sent us to a psychiatrist when in 1865 when most African Americans were emancipated. Nobody sat down and say, let's take the shackles off your brain. The shackles are still there. Self-hatred. They don't like themselves. They don't like the, and then therefore it transcend over to, I don't like other African Americans. Somebody can kill you at a heartbeat and don't blink their eye because they have self-hatred. But to know who they are, to be able to know that this is a condition of slavery, a legacy that's been going on. The physical chain might be off, but the mental chain is still there.
And I agree with that. We got to start holding people accountable. We're not holding people accountable. The best example is that a couple of emails that I received last week. We got 2 guys running for governor of Maryland. One was named Mike Rosebaugh, I think. The other one's name was John King. He was a Puerto Rican that was in the Obama administration as Secretary of Education. Now here's 2 guys that are running for the governor of Maryland. We don't even know who they are. But they come out and got a nerve to ask you, well, could you give me a $7 donation? I don't even know who you are, man. Why don't you come on, speak the truth so we can find out who you are? And then here comes a brother with the same type of line. They take us for granted because we don't hold them accountable. I told Mike Rosebaugh, I wouldn't give you 7 cents. You're talking about $7. And he want to run for governor. If you want to run for governor, tell us who you are and why you deserve our vote. They think that they can pimp the Black community anytime they want to because we don't hold them accountable. Because a guy like me, Harold Bell, he's a troublemaker because he's going to tell the truth. And you got to call them out. We're not calling them out. We got to call them out. Is Lawrence Lucas out there?
He's out there. Come on in, Mr. Lucas.
Lawrence Lucas is with the Black Farmers Association. I told him to come on and give us an update on the Black farmers. Lawrence, come on aboard.
Okay, I'm pleased to be here and thanks for inviting me. I'm going to give you just a quick overview of what is going on. And I'm talking about the very controversial case that you've been reading in the Washington Post and seeing in the news and hearing on the periphery of the administration. And that is the Emergency for Relief for Farmers of Color Act and the Justice for Black Farmer Act of 2021. The Emergency Relief Act has now been under attack by the white supremacists and farm organizations around the country that is nothing but saying to Black people and Americans, that Black farmers don't deserve debt relief after they have suffered tremendously and lost their land, lost a way of life, and they've also lost the ability to pass on wealth. At this point, we are focusing the Coalition of Minority Employees and the Justice for Black Farmer Group, which is the group that made this bill possible. We wanted to make sure that Black farmers would get compensated for the abuse that they suffered, both the debt relief and the resolution of their cases. The first section of that act, which is 01005, is now in the court system and is now being challenged by the white supremacists and white farm groups from around the country. The two cases I'm speaking of, the one in Texas and the one in Wisconsin. Now, what we have decided to do was not go down that rabbit hole and get all involved in anonymous briefs and all that, because we feel as though it's a waste of time and resources, because that case is now in the hands of the Justice Department and the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Biden administration. What we have done is to focus on the second part of that act, which is the clause that deals with not the debt relief, but the resolution of the 14,000 or more cases and the system that brought about the discrimination in the first place, and that is the Office of Civil Rights, and how dysfunctional it has been, not only under the Trump administration, but it goes back to the Obama administration as well as the Bush administration. There was a newspaper article in the Washington Post this week which agrees with what we've been saying all along. Harold in the show and others have allowed the coalition to come on and tell the truth about what is going on in that regard. What we're doing is we came up with a policy document about 8 or 12 pages, and we're going to focus on the section of that bill, which is 1006. And 1006 deals with the resolution and the solution to the problems that still exist at USDA. And so that is what we're going to do in order to stay focused. At the same time, we're going to demand that the Biden administration do something about the systemic conditions and the leadership at USDA, which is headed up by Tom Vilsack, who we never agreed with, and many of the congressionals and farm leaders around the country found it very shocking that we end up, after he spent 8 years of doing nothing and closing cases and abusing farmers as well as employees, that we have to deal with him for another 4 or 8 more years. So that'll give you an idea, but we're not going to go to sleep on this problem. We're going to continue to stay focused, and we're going to demand that the U.S. Department of Agriculture under Secretary Vilsack deals with the systemic problem, such as accountability, such as transparency, such as case resolution, such as making sure that the Office of General Counsel don't interfere with the civil rights process, and make sure that the county committee system, which is really part on the organization on the outside in rural America, which USDA is in partnership to deny Black farmers and other minority farmers their just due, their programs that are available to them, as well as resources. So that'll give you an idea where we are. But the one, I want to thank Harold for having us on, but the one advantage that we have is that we've had enough of the news media since Elizabeth Warren introduced her plan to deal with discrimination and racism against Black farmers and employees. this is where we are today. But that's where it started. And it started with the Justice for Black Farmer Group. And it started with the Coalition of Minority Employees and other farmers and farm groups around the country.
Okay. Well, we got to get out here. Gary, how about let's go round the bend for those who didn't get a chance. You got 1 minute to close it out. Gary, who we got out there?
Oh, well, let's go to CJ. CJ, what do you got?
CJ, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I've just been listening generally. One comment I have is based on the crime rate, where you're talking about rising across the country, and a big factor in that is economics. These are economic issues. Crime is fueled by poverty, and poverty is a policy choice that we make here in America to keep people impoverished. So if you address poverty, you can address a large swath of the crime. People are selling drugs because they're trying to compete in the neighborhood to make money. There's quick and easy money. And when the minimum wage is $7.25 and that doesn't afford rent anywhere in the country, then you have an issue if people are going to be fighting for material resources. And that spawns a lot of the crime. It just does. Like the violence, as you said, people not caring about each other. They don't care about each other because they're trying to survive. They're trying to fight over money. This is the drug dealing and all of that. So if you address the drug war, if you address poverty, which is why people are for defunding the police, it's not to weaken the police, it's to strengthen the economic conditions of the community so they won't need police, so people won't be fighting for material resources, so there won't be all of that over money. So it's really just a policy choice to keep people in these situations. There's enough money in America to go around, but you know, there's capitalism that is going to always perpetuate these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Charles.
First, I want to acknowledge Michael Jackson. That's when we say Alabama, or like Nina Simone say Mississippi, goddamn. When we talk about the South, and then we see the accomplishments that Michael Jackson is making down there, and positioning himself to be in a position to influence policies in that institution. Kudos to him. Also, I want to echo our genealogists. Both of them, Dorris, thank you for the work that you're doing in terms of documenting our history and giving, speaking truth to power. And Sister Char, I agree with you. It's a book out called The Post-Traumatic Slave Disorder. Post-traumatic slave disorder, and that's what her thesis was on. That way we've been conditioned to think a certain way. So as long as we think that way, we're gonna react that way. Which go back to what CJ just said. Poverty is a policy choice. So we're being kept in poverty for the sole reason to continue to perpetuate what we're doing to each other. And it's a great show, Harold Bell, once again.
Thank you, Charles. Gary.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd like to end with, I think the geological study of Blacks in the Bible will go a long way in helping to foster more self-confidence in ourselves. Some of the greatest architects, greatest generals and all were found right there in the Bible and can be traced back by their names and their tribes, but there's very little that's spoken of today.
Okay.
I want to say this before I forget, these videos, even though we didn't have the sound, I'm going to find some way to get them into the show when we edit the show. So they will not go, you know, we're going to get these videos in one way or the other. They're very, very short clips. They're very important. And D.A. Jackson, saw your clip. We loved it. It's going to be on the show. And please, I'll make sure that we get the websites for Char and Dorris to make sure that we have those, that I can edit that into the show.
Yeah. I just want to say going out there, don't forget to check out Black Men in America. I got a blog of this week talking about really the scam. One of the biggest scams in the country is the AARP, you know, and senior citizens, and how they are scamming. Senior citizens are being scammed annually for close to $2 billion. And we talk about senior citizens age 55 and over, and we're talking about 20, 30, 40, 50 million senior citizens who are members of the AARP, and they don't even have a fraud unit, you know, to tackle this problem. And they got all these people hanging out there, losing their monies, man, whether it's by over being charged for a used car, whether Geico, like I've been trying to be scammed at Geico. Andrew Durant, I'm coming after you, my brother. And we got Comcast, we got dental insurance companies. They are scamming senior citizens. And we got AARP with people there making $300,000 a year. Joanne Jenkins, her mentor was Addison Rand, who I knew his father, making $300,000 a year, bringing on scammers like James Brown to be ambassador to senior citizens. We got to do something about that. That's right there in our face. I'm a senior citizen, of course I am. And once again, not only kids in trouble, but we got seniors in trouble. And we need to address that issue, through whatever organization, John H. Lewis chapter. Hey, we need to get on this, man, and let people know that we care about our seniors. Well, it's time to get out of here. Once again, Char, Doris, Keith, Charles, Sydney, Jacques, CJ, and of course, our friend Michael Jackson in Selma, Alabama. Thanks for being a part of Speak the Truth, because that's what we need more of. And I just want you to remember, as I always say, you cannot soar with eagles if you're hanging out with chickens. We're gone.
Thank you.
Be safe, everybody.
Bye. Be safe.